Hi, I'm Hannah. This is the Theology Therapist channel where I talk about all things mental health and spirituality. And so if you find yourself curious about any of those things, then I invite you to subscribe with the bell notifications. That way you can stay up to date on all new video content. And from time to time, I do post in the community tab things like polls, resources, and updates. And so when you do subscribe, you will get notifications or that'll pop up on your YouTube as well. It's a really great way and easy way for us to stay connected on YouTube, which isn't as back and forth, I would say, or direct as some other social medias. Today, we are going to talk about going home for the holidays with toxic religious family. So let's get started. I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind. When you are entering the holiday season, you know that you are going to be spending time with family who are now likely differently religious than you. And so some things to keep in mind. One, I think the first thing to keep in mind, going into this, knowing what kind of relationship that you want to have with those family members. Is it are you committed to being in that relationship, or is it better for you to not be in that relationship? I think that's some super important work to know and understand before going into those contexts. And I guess one thing to just mention there is that is also not extreme. You could lie somewhere in the middle between being really close with your family and going no contact. And there's a whole lot of ground between those two. So just not assuming that you need to be one or the other. But the magic comes when you decide for you what is the right combination of contact with your family. Because from that decision, from that knowing, you can then go ahead and set appropriate boundaries around time, space, energy, conversations, things like that. The other thing that I really want to remind you of and encourage you about this time of year is that this is the time of year in which we tend to run ourselves ragged. It's the time of year when a lot of times work is busier, when there's a lot of deadlines to meet. There are a ton of family events, parties, holiday parties, right? And there's a lot of consumerism rushing between all of the different parties and holidays this time of year. So it tends to be the time of year that we do run ourselves ragged. So if you expect a difficult encounter with your religious family that you are going to see during one of these holidays, what I would recommend strongly is that you plan ahead of time a get-together with friends or loved ones, or just a special self-care activity for you to do after, right after that. Maybe you have lunch at your family's and then you plan to have dinner with your friends, just of that sort, because sometimes when you leave those family gatherings, especially if they are toxic, then you leave really needing to be poured into and really needing to be cared for. And so I really strongly recommend that you preemptively do that. Okay, so the number one thing that I recommend that you do when you plan to see some of these toxic family members is to set boundaries. And there are lots of different ways to set boundaries. One of the resources that I'll share with you is that I use in my therapy clients all the time. So it's called the Better Boundaries Workbook. It is by Sharon Martin, who is a LCSW. She's a social worker, and it's a really interactive workbook. You can see here all of the different activities. And so if you're looking for some hands-on support, or without meet like another person. If you're looking for some like really dedicated direction on how to set a boundary, this is your book, because she walks you through step by step the ways in which you set a boundary, review its success, and then make changes. So that's a resource for you if you want to get that and prep for the holidays. I will link that below. Now, here are 3 areas that I recommend you consider setting boundaries when you are going to see toxic religious family at the holiday season. The first one is time. How much time do you want to or should you spend with them? Now, be honest here. Be honest with yourself, because if it is not good for you, you can find a sweet spot. I've worked with a lot of clients on this, and even myself, you can find a sweet spot if you've decided to be in touch with your family. It doesn't mean that, like, you might say, you know what, if I stay overnight, it's not good. Or I can do a meal and leave and we're okay. And so thinking about like time in that way of like, how much time is good enough to see each other, but not long enough to get into deep troubled waters. Okay, the second area that I recommend that you set boundaries around is space. What physical space will you be in for this event that you're going to? Are there some spaces that feel better or worse than others? Are you going into a space where some sort of trauma or abuse happened? Are you going into a space where you've been habitually put down and invalidated? Or is this really a neutral space, right? Or is this a space that you love? So consider the space where you will be. And then consider, how can the space help you set boundaries? What that might mean is taking a break in the bathroom, or going on a walk, or busying yourself in the kitchen. But thinking about your physical space and trying to find creative ways that you can use it to help set boundaries and create this supportive container in an otherwise maybe tense environment. Number 3, I strongly recommend that you set boundaries around your energy. Knowing that you are going into an environment where you're going to be with toxic religious family, it is so important that you protect your energy. That oftentimes our family members who are different religiously or politically, and sometimes those can go hand in hand, that we can bait each other, throw something out into conversation, and if you've known each other, like if you've grown up with each other, they know the things that are going to make you tick and vice versa. And really trying to take a step back in order to not take that bait, because it is so easy. I've had those moments where we've all been like just sitting in the living room, like reading or watching TV or doing nothing, and someone just like, it's almost like just drops a little bomb in the middle of the room, and everybody is like looking around. Are we gonna do this right now? And there's that moment of choice. I'll tell you, like I'm actually thinking about a specific moment where my family and I were sitting around in the living room, and my mom like threw out some, I believe, political statement, or I can't remember if it was political or religious, but the rest of us in the room looked around at each other because we all know that was the thing that was going to make me tick. And normally I would have taken the bait. What happened was we had a lot of conversations around like what we can talk about and what we can't in order to have happy relationships. And so one of my other family members, my dad, actually told my mom that she needs to leave the room. And now we can probably laugh about it, but that's the kind of thing that needs to happen in order for you to protect your energy, is recognizing like when you're about to take the bait and whether you need to leave the room. And using that to segue, like really know before you go in there what you will engage with and what you won't. I had a really tough quarantine period after COVID. And so during that time and even afterwards, I was just like, I had a rule. I'm not talking about it. I don't want to talk about it. I'm not talking about it. Not interested in listening to it. Anyone talk about it. I'm just not. And that was difficult for some of my family members who wanted to talk about it. It was like we were processing it in different ways, and their way was to talk about it. And my way was to completely shut it down. So I had to say, I could talk about these other things, but I couldn't talk about that. And so there were conversations on the phone where I had to say, okay, I understand that this is important for you, but I can't talk about this. If you want to talk about this, it can't be with me. Okay? And then launch right back into it. And I just was like, I'm sorry, I have to stop you. It sounds like you really need to talk about this, and I can't do that. And so I'm going to have to go. I'm going to have to hang up the phone. And we did. And that's what I mean about like really understanding what you can and can't talk about, what feels okay for you to engage with, and what feels triggering. Have an understanding of that before you go into your holiday setting. And the last thing that I would just say is remember that you are not your family, that you guys are not one and the same, that you are your own person. And I say this because I think that it can be so easy with our family to be so identified with each other that it's like you go home and all of a sudden you're a teenager again, even though you're like a 30, 40-year-old adult. I just want to like encourage you that you are not your family, and that you can practice, because it is a practice. It doesn't happen once. That you can practice going in to those contexts and being an observer, of being your own person, of seeing the room and the people and what's happening as separate, not as like completely in the movie, if you will. So I think that these are some really important things to consider as you're heading into the holiday season with all of the parties and its drama that it tends to hold. If you like this video, you can press the like button and subscribe. That really helps my channel. And I would invite you as well, if you have things that have helped you in the past, or if you are struggling with some of this as the holiday season approaches, to leave a comment and just let us know what's going on for you, and as much as you feel comfortable, how have you dealt with this in the past, and what has worked and what hasn't worked, and that way we can encourage each other. So remember that if you want to stay connected, you can join my newsletter. The link for that is in the description. And I hope you have a very happy Thanksgiving. I'll see you next time.